Here is an English-language narrative about Pierre-Jules Boulanger and how his work at Citroën contributed indirectly and directly to the war effort. The story flows chronologically, explores his decisions, the industrial context, the resistance tactics, and the legacy. It's written so you can produce it as part of a long-form audio or video piece. It was 1940. France had collapsed before the German Blitz. The streets of Paris were silent under occupation. The factories that once roared for civilian life now served the machinery of war. In that moment, one industrialist faced a dilemma. How does one lead an automobile company when one's nation is under enemy control? That man was Pierre-Jules Boulanger. Born in 1885 in Saint-Lenoble, he served as a young man in the French Air Force during the First World War, trained in aerial photography, earned the rank of captain, decorated with the Legion of Honor. +2 after the war, he entered the world of industry, joining the tire maker Michelin, eventually becoming part of its board in 1922, +1 by the mid-1930s. Citroën, having financial difficulties, was taken over by Michelin, and Boulanger became vice president of Citroën and soon after president with responsibility for engineering and design. +passionate Citroën +2 from that position, he charted a bold course, creating, among other things, the project for a very simple, very inexpensive car for the masses, though that story is for another time. But his wartime role and the way Citroën's factories interacted with the German war machine reveals a more complex and courageous history. When Germany occupied France in 1940, factories of major French manufacturers were commandeered. Citroën's production lines were pressed into service for the Wehrmacht, trucks, heavy load carriers, other vehicles the German army required. Under these pressures, the company's leader faced enormous moral and practical choices: comply and facilitate the war machine, or resist covertly from within. Boulanger chose resistance. According to multiple sources, he refused to cooperate personally with key German figures such as Ferdinand Porsche, and he refused direct communication with German authorities except via intermediaries. To Citroën be to more than that. He and his factories engaged in subtle sabotage. One of the most ingenious and widely cited acts happened on the production line of Citroën trucks destined for German use. The oil dipstick, a small but crucial engine component, was adjusted so that the full mark was set to low. At a glance, the vehicle appeared properly serviced, but underneath the engine would suffer oil starvation, engine seizure down the road, leaving the German user stranded. Historic mysteries +2. It was slow sabotage. The production lines continued. The trucks left the factory looking normal. Yet, when the vehicle was in the field, the failure would strike at a critical time. Boulanger's policy, don't stop production, which might invite immediate closure or worse from the occupiers, but make sure the output is unreliable in key ways. Go slow tactics in workforce, minor but fatal mechanical changes that only show up later. This was industrial resistance. +1 Meanwhile, in parallel, Boulanger managed to hide what would become one of Citroën's most iconic developments. The project for a little car, the TPV, Tours Petite Voiture, was begun in the late 1930s as war broke out and occupation began. The design work was secret, prototypes were hidden, buried, or disguised, so that if the Germans took control they could not appropriate the design for military uses. +1 in that way, Boulanger used the wartime period to safeguard not just his factory and workforce, but the future of civilian mobility in France. Even though war seemed to push only weapons and tanks, the war years saw extreme scarcity. Raw materials such as aluminium and magnesium became precious. Priority went to military manufacturers, yet the Citroën engineers under Boulanger continued to tinker, redesigning the project to use steel panels, redesigning the engine to be air-cooled and more austere, so that after the war production could resume. +1 That foresight meant when peace returned the foundations were already laid. When liberation came, Citroën emerged into a country in ruins. Infrastructure destroyed, resources limited. Boulanger's leadership followed into the post-war era. The project for the simple car would launch in 1948, though delayed by war. But the war had not only delayed progress, it shaped it. The processes of sabotage, hidden development, and wartime constraint imbued the company with a mindset of minimalism, economy, resourcefulness. Boulanger's wartime acts had ensured Citroën's survival and future relevance. Here are some of the specific ways in which his work during the war helped the French war effort and, afterwards, helped the rebuilding. Industrial survival and workforce preservation. By keeping production running under constraints, Boulanger preserved jobs, technical capacity, and industrial know-how in France. Rather than shuttering factories or relinquishing all control to the occupiers, Citroën stayed active, albeit under duress, retaining skilled workers and engineering teams for the post-war period. Subtle battlefield disruption via sabotage, the oil dipstick trick, deliberate slowdowns, and MIS-manufactured components meant that vehicles supplied to the German war machine were less reliable. The small but systematic degradation of the enemy's logistical capacity through industrial sabotage is a powerful example of resistance behind the lines. Safeguarding future civilian mobility by secretly continuing design work on the TPV project, hiding prototypes and protecting blueprints. Boulanger ensured that in the aftermath of war, France would have a civilian car production ready to be launched. This meant that once peace returned, French industry could switch from war to civilian production more quickly, a key part of rebuilding. Material awareness and austerity mindset. Wartime shortages forced innovation in materials and manufacturing. Boulanger directed his engineering team to redesign components using less exotic materials, to simplify systems, to reduce cost and weight. This wartime engineering discipline shaped the post-war products such as the simple car and thus France's industrial recovery. Symbolic resistance and morale. Boulanger's refusal to collaborate overtly with German authorities and his appearance on German enemies of the Reich lists made him a figure of French resistance, an example to workers and engineers alike. Plus the fact that he still ran a major industrial enterprise under occupation and managed to protect its future is an inspiration. Of course, his story is not without tragedy. He died in a car accident in November 1950, driving a Citroën traction Avant on a French national road. But his legacy lived on, in the vehicles Citroën produced, in the way French industry recovered, and in the lessons of engineering, economy, adaptability, and quiet resistance. When one asks, how did the automobile industry help in war beyond tanks and fighters? Boulanger's Citroën provides a case study, not by supplying the enemy with perfect war machines, but by undermining them quietly, by protecting future civilian mobility, by keeping the wheels of industry turning under occupation so that after the storm cleared, France could rise again. In many ways, his leadership illustrates that war is not only fought at the front. Sometimes it is fought in the quiet hum of a factory line, in the adjustment of a dipstick mark, in the decision to bury prototypes rather than give them over. These are the lesser-known but vital acts of strategic industrial warfare. Today, when you see a small Citroën car driving smoothly down the road, you might glimpse not just a vehicle but a legacy, one of survival, ingenuity, and resilience. The work of Pierre-Jules Boulanger during the darkest years of the 20th century is woven into that legacy. That night, when the gray outlines of Paris streets were pierced by the wail of sirens, the air trembled. Hours later, silence fell, the kind that precedes catastrophe. In the shadow of the Citroën factory, behind corrugated metal fences, a small team of engineers secretly assembled a very, very small car, a vehicle meant to change the lives of thousands of French farmers. Yet it would soon be caught in war, secrecy, and survival. This is the story of Citroën's TPV project, Tours Petite Voiture, and how it became a legend on the dusty backroads outside Paris, where horses pulled wagons through endless ruts. One man, Pierre-Jules Boulanger, vice president of Citroën, had a vision. He saw that ordinary French farmers still had no access to a car. His demand was clear: create a vehicle that could carry 4 passengers and 50 kilograms of cargo, drive across rough farmland, use minimal fuel, be simple to maintain, and cheap enough for anyone. One more requirement: it must cross a plowed field with a basket of eggs inside, and not break a single one. Engineer André Lefebvre took charge. Between 1936 and 1937, the first prototypes of the TPV appeared, made of aluminum and magnesium, weighing barely 370 kilograms, stripped to the essentials. It was radical. By 1937, around 20 experimental units were ready. By 1939, there were dozens of versions tested: water-cooled engines, hammock-style seats, wafer-thin aluminum shells. The project carried the secret name TPV to Petite Voiture, Orters Petite Voiture, the very small car. It was supposed to debut publicly in the autumn of 1939. Brochures were printed, the launch planned. Then the thunder of tanks rolled over Europe. When France entered the war in September 1939, Citroën's factories were seized for military work. Raw materials vanished overnight. Management knew if the TPV project fell into German hands, it could be weaponized or confiscated. So they made a daring choice: to hide it. Some prototypes were buried. Others were walled up in barns and attics. A few were disguised as delivery vans. Engineers worked in secret, quietly switching to steel parts as aluminum and magnesium disappeared. There's even a legend that Citroën workers mislabeled crates of factory tooling as scrap metal to keep them from being shipped to Germany. For the rest of the war, TPV slept beneath dust and silence, forgotten by the world, remembered only by its creators. When the war finally ended, France was in ruins. The government tightly controlled all industrial production. Citroën decided to rebuild the project. Aluminum was too expensive now, so they used steel. The engine changed from water-cooled to air-cooled. The transmission became a simple 4-speed. And so, on October 7, 1948, at the Paris Motor Show, Citroën unveiled the 2CV der Chevaux, the direct descendant of the TPV dream. Its name didn't mean to horsepower literally, but referred to its tax class, the smallest and cheapest. The 2CV was mocked as a tin umbrella on wheels, but it had soul, Michelin radial tires, revolutionary for their time, front-wheel drive and feather light, controls, hammock seats, and ultra-soft suspension. You could truly cross a plowed field. With eggs intact, a 4-speed gearbox in a peasant's car. Unthinkable in the 1940s, simple mechanics that anyone could repair with a wrench and patience. It wasn't beautiful by luxury standards, but it was honest. By 1949, demand exploded. Waiting lists grew longer than for any other French car. The 2CV became a symbol of freedom and practicality, the car for farmers, students, dreamers. Over decades it evolved: colors, trims, even a 4x4 version for explorers. What began as a wartime secret turned into a beloved part of French identity. For decades, people thought the original TPV prototypes were lost forever. Then, in 1994, during a renovation at Citroën's Laferte-Vidame Test Center, workers opened an old barn and found 3 intact TPV cars, untouched since before the war. Their aluminum bodies were dusty but whole, ghostly survivors of an era that tried to erase them. Today, they sit in museums, physical proof that even forgotten dreams can endure. TPV proved that innovation can thrive even under oppression. War forced engineers to think creatively. Sparking post-war design revolutions, the 2CV showed that simplicity, not luxury, can win hearts for generations. Hidden technology, preserved by courage, can one day shape an entire nation's culture. Picture a French farmer in 1949. He steps outside, climbs into his small, canvas-topped CV, and starts the little air-cooled engine. It sputters, hums, and rolls down the dirt road. He doesn't know the full story, that deep beneath Citroën's wartime silence, this machine was once buried to stay alive. Each gear shift, each squeak of suspension, carries whispers of those dark nights when engineers hid their work from the enemy. It's not a tank, not a weapon, but it survived a war. And in doing so, it became something greater, a symbol of endurance, hope, and human ingenuity, the small car that defied history itself.